Hi everyone, thanks for being here. I wanted to start today by talking about a game. Maybe you've played it before. It is called Chutes and Ladders, right? In case you haven't played this before, the rules are very simple. You start at the bottom, you roll dice to work your way to the finish, which is at the top. On the way, there are a certain number of obstacles. There are ladders, where if you land at the bottom of the ladder, you get to climb up to the top, getting closer to the finish. And of course, if you land on a chute, you have to slide to the bottom, closer to the start. The game itself is pretty simple. It's something for pretty young children, but the history of this game is much more complicated and interesting than you might think. It has origins in a game called Snakes and Ladders, which dates back about 2,000 years to India, where it was used to teach children in the Hindu faith about the concept of reincarnation. If we look at a more close-up version of this board, you can see over here we have snakes, which take the place of our chutes, which you would slide to the bottom. We also have these red lines going across, which are our ladders that climb to the top. You'll also notice that every box has a little small bit of text, which basically is a listing of either good or bad deeds that people are committing when they land on these spaces, moving up and down the karmic ladder, right? And I get really interested in the history of games and thinking about games because even in this one simple children's game, there are all these lessons that we can take away from it. We can think about world history and how we get from a game like Snakes and Ladders to Chutes and Ladders, and that involves all kinds of interesting concepts like colonialization in India and world trade patterns, and we can track that almost year by year to see how we get to this version of the game. We can also think about a lot of cultural history that comes in this. For example, Snakes and Ladders has way more snakes than it has ladders, and in the 2024 American version of this game, we have many more ladders than we do chutes. And we can just think about this concept of reward and punishment and how that kind of fits in with our cultural values, right? So if a game as simple as Chutes and Ladders can teach us world history, it can teach us religion, it can teach us cultural history, I really am interested in thinking about what else games can do. So there's this concept in game design and game theory called the magic circle. And basically what that is it's a concept that when we are playing a game, we are taking part in collaborative storytelling. That when we are sitting around the table, which may be our circle, we become different people. We become characters within a story. The example I like to share of this is if I'm playing Monopoly, I can charge my wife rent, where in real life, that would not go over very well, right? But within the context of a game, it's okay, and as a result of that, it opens us up to new experiences and opportunities while playing games that we might not otherwise get to have. So I think a lot about this in terms of creative writing, right? I think in the creative writing classroom, we often talk about what can creative writing do? What is this greater purpose, right? And I think a good story can open up the world to new perspectives. We can see the world through someone else's eyes. We can travel through time, across continents. And hopefully that will open us up in really beautiful ways. But I'm increasingly interested as a creative writer about thinking about how we can use games as a way of storytelling where instead of a reader following along with the story, they get to be a character and active participant in the story that's unfolding and what different opportunities that can give to us. This idea really started forming for me first with the board game Pandemic. If you haven't played it, it is basically a game about a virus spreading across the globe, and you as a team of players work to stop it. Maybe that hits a little too close to home for some of us at this point. And in fact, I started playing this game back in 2020 with some friends over Skype. And on top of just being kind of a chance to connect with people when we all felt pretty isolated, all locked away in our separate homes, it was a way of thinking through this process of how disease spreads, and also what is our job and responsibility in trying to find solutions to this problem? How can we be there for each other? And I think when I started thinking about it on that deeper level, it really got me interested in how games can be just a wonderful model for this kind of thinking. So with the rest of my time here in this talk, I'm just going to share a couple other games that maybe you're familiar with, and I want to think about some of the bigger implications of what these games can do for us. I have the game Settlers Catan. So again, a fairly popular game, but in case you haven't played it, the very basic overviews of the game are that players are collecting different resources on this map, so wood, brick, etc., in order to build roads, villages, and cities as a way of collecting points. Now, it's a fun game, but what makes it really unique is that every time you play, the board changes. Every resource and how much of that resource is on the board becomes randomized. As a result, players of this game have to actively change their strategy every time they play. There's a lot of experimentation in this game. And experimentation is not something that comes easy to most of us, right? To try and do something new, to approach a problem in a completely different way than we have in the past. And because this game forces us to take part in that improvisation, it really encourages creative and outside-of-the-box thinking. And the wonderful thing about games that I often come back to is this idea that successes and failures are on a much smaller scale, right? It's fun to win a game, but also if you lose, we have a much easier time accepting failure in a game, at least some of us, right? But there's always the chance to play again, right? The consequences are pretty minimal. So that opportunity really does open us up for a willingness to try and fail. The other cultural aspect of this game that I just like to draw attention to is that it is a game about building and not destroying. And if you wanted to have a much longer conversation about board game history and like shifting cultures and norms, we could talk about how in the post-World War II era, most of the games that have come out and become popular are games about rebuilding or collecting of cities and resources or building railroads. And we can see how that more or less tracks some of the post-war kind of events and culture, and also this desire to get away from games like Risk, where we're just intent on building armies and attacking each other. So again, just another point of shifting culture that's worth pointing out. Next, we have Dungeons and Dragons, which is a favorite of mine. If you haven't played it before, again, the basic definition that I can give to you is that it is a game where players take on imaginary roles and then take their characters on adventures. The wonderful thing about this game is that the number of options for how that story unfolds are infinite, only limited by the player's imagination. To give you one example, if the characters needed to collect a magical item in order to travel to the next city on their quest, in order to get that magical object, they could try and kill the person who currently has it, they could try to sneak in and steal it, or they could go the other direction and offer to buy it, or just ask them very, very nicely, right? There are all these different possibilities, both violent and nonviolent. The Cincinnati Public Library last summer had a program for their teens called Dungeons and Dragons and Ethics, right? And I really love this program. And what it did is it presented scenarios like the one that I just shared and had the teens playing the game make the choices they wanted to make, and then they would have these conversations about the ethics, what's right and wrong, how could that have worked out better. They talked about strategy. And one of the really amazing things is over the course of a summer, they realized that students increasingly turned towards nonviolent solutions to the problems that they faced. And it wasn't because they were coached to do so, but it was more the learning of the game experience and seeing how it was actually more fun for them to have to do the creative problem solving than simply running in with the sword and swinging it at everyone. Because the game has these simplified social interactions where you try to do something, you roll a dice, you find out whether it succeeded or it failed. It's a very simplified system for looking at the world. And that simplified system has actually been used to teach children on the autism spectrum about social norms and cues, right? It's easier to understand the rules of a game sometimes than the unwritten rules of social interaction, but it can be used as a training and teaching tool in this way. And finally, the game encourages this idea of teamwork and cooperation, where every player has different strengths and weaknesses that need to be used in order to succeed on the quest that they're taking on. And the last game I wanted to share with you today is a game called Daybreak. This one, maybe people aren't as familiar with. It was actually designed by the same team that made the game Pandemic from earlier, but what's unique about this game is it was specifically designed with the intention of teaching players of the game about climate change and what roles they can take in finding better solutions for the world. The players in this game are given roles that are in direct conflict with each other. For example, one player might have to take on the role of an energy company, where someone else is in charge of a developing nation that's feeling the most adverse effects of the change happening within the game. In order to win, they must come to the result of preventing further change or finding renewable energy, but they also need to do so in a way that benefits everyone's conflicted interest. So as a strategy game, it's very interesting because you have to work with people who maybe want different things than you, but it is also a really good model for how we can work with people who have different beliefs, different political affiliations, et cetera, and still find ways to find common goals that we can be working toward together. And the game itself, as mentioned, has specific calls to action and things that players can do. So it's wonderful that games can not only model the thinking around some of these difficult subjects, but also give direct resources and calls for what people can do next if they feel inspired by their gaming experience. So again, to talk about storytelling and creative writing, I have all these very ambitious ideas and goals about changing people's minds, calling them to action for bigger social issues, but that's not why any of us read stories, right? We read stories to be entertained, to have fun, to be excited, maybe to learn a little bit about a new subject, but ultimately we want our reading experiences to be enjoyable. For me, thinking about this mixture of storytelling and games has opened up a lot of different opportunities for thinking about how that change can happen in ways that's really fun and exciting. Without getting more broadly into it, games are also already used in things like scientific modeling, in sociology, in psychology, in English and in history, in education. So games are everywhere. So even if you're not a creative writer like me, I encourage you to spend the next time you get together with your friends or colleagues to maybe open up a game, have some fun, get to know each other, and maybe think about the ways that you can use these games to change the world. Thank you.